He found an orphan girl guarding her mother's body. The rancher said, "You're coming with me, kid." Arizona Territory, August 1875. The desert burned under the noonday sun, its silence broken only by the crunch of hooves over cracked earth. Wes Callahan, broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, guided his lead horse through the shallow pass that curved around the red cliffs. The wind was dry and sharp, stinging his eyes, lifting small clouds of dust that danced briefly before falling still. He had ridden this trail a dozen times, always alone, always in silence. But today, something different stirred in the air, a sound, faint, unnatural. He slowed the horse, narrowing his eyes. A cry. It was high-pitched and ragged, not from an animal, a child. Wes dismounted in one smooth motion, letting the reins drop. He moved carefully toward the sound, every step sinking slightly into the hot sand. At the base of a mesquite tree, in a shallow dip in the land, he saw her. A small girl, no more than 4 years old, barefoot, face streaked with dust and dried tears. She sat beside a woman's body, her hands tightly gripping a stick. The woman lay awkwardly, half covered by a thin sheet of blowing sand. One of her arms was curled protectively toward the child, though lifeless. "Don't touch her!" the girl shrieked, standing abruptly, swinging the stick with more fear than strength. "Mama's sleeping." Wes raised his hand slowly. "All right," he said gently. "Not touching." He took another step, crouching down to get a better look. The woman, mid to late 20s, pale beneath the grime, wasn't moving. Her bonnet had slipped back, revealing sweat-matted hair. Her lips were cracked, her breathing. Was there any? Wes edged closer and pressed 2 fingers against her neck. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a flutter. A weak, irregular pulse. She was alive, barely. He worked fast. From his saddlebag he pulled a canteen, dripping water onto a strip of cloth and pressing it to her forehead. He soaked her lips and opened her mouth, just enough to trickle in small drops. The girl, still wary, edged closer. Her eyes never left him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Junie." "Well, Junie, I'm Wes. Your mama's hanging on, but she needs help. And you?" He paused, scanning the horizon. Buzzards circled not far off. "You're coming with me, kid." Junie's lip quivered. "She can't stay here." "She won't." Wes returned to his horse, unstrapped a blanket, and built a makeshift canopy between 2 stunted trees, shielding them from the worst of the sun. He brought his medical kit, well worn, fraying at the edges, and checked her pulse again, faint, but there. He lifted the woman carefully, laying her under the shade. She moaned softly but didn't wake. Junie knelt beside her, whispering, "Mama, wake up." Wes sat back on his heels and exhaled. "She's tougher than she looks." He didn't ask what had happened. Not yet. There would be time for that. Instead, he turned toward the girl and said quietly, "We need to get her out of here. It's a long ride. Think you can sit a horse?" Junie looked up, wide-eyed. "I never did before." First time for everything. Wes rigged a sling between his saddle and the back of the horse, carefully securing the woman. He lifted Junie into the saddle in front of him, her small frame barely filling the space. As the horse began to move, she leaned into his chest, holding tight. "Will she be okay?" she asked. Wes didn't answer right away. He looked ahead, toward the endless stretch of desert. "She's got a chance," he said at last. "Let's make sure she gets it." And with that, they rode west, 3 shadows against the burning sky, one of them clinging to life. Wes Callahan moved through the heat in silence, the weight on his back heavy and fragile. Eleanor's body lay limp across his broad shoulders, her breath shallow, skin burning. He had draped his duster over her to block the worst of the sun, but it did little. The desert wind was hot as a forge. Junie trotted beside him, clutching the hem of his shirt. Her small legs stumbled in the sand, but she never let go. "Mama," she kept whispering, eyes wide and shining with salt. "Mama, I'm here, don't go." Wes didn't speak. Every step he took sank deep into the dust. But he never slowed. His ranch was still miles out, tucked beyond a bluff, where the land turned from red to gold. He kept his eyes forward and his ears tuned to the woman's faint pulse, counting beats between steps. By late afternoon, the house appeared through the haze, small, sturdy, and alone. He crossed the yard, kicked the door open with his boot, and carried Eleanor inside. With one strong motion, he laid her across the cleanest cot in the back room. "Stay with her," he told Junie, and the little girl nodded, scrambling onto the edge of the bed to hold her mother's hand. Wes moved quickly. He lit the stove, boiled water, and pulled down the tin box from the top shelf, a leftover from his days as a field medic. Inside, rolled bandages, dried herbs, needles blackened from old fire, and a bottle of carbolic that was nearly gone. He crushed chamomile and bark into a pouch and dropped it in a kettle to steep. Eleanor stirred once, a soft moan escaping her cracked lips. "That's right," Wes muttered. "Come back slow." He cooled a cloth and wiped her brow, again and again. Each hour he returned to check her pulse, propping her body on its side to avoid choking, coaxing tiny sips of water between her lips when her jaw unclenched. At night, he kept a stool between their beds, Eleanor in the cot. Junie curled on the floor beside her. Wes sat with a bowie knife in one hand and 2 fingers pressed to Eleanor's neck, counting every pulse like it might vanish at any moment. On the third night, Junie sat up, eyes puffy and voice soft. "Is Mama an angel now?" Wes looked at her, then back at Eleanor's flushed face. "No," he said, firm and low. "She's fighting too hard to be one yet." Junie nodded slowly and laid back down, her fingers still curled in her mother's nightdress. That night, the fever worsened. It started with shivers, then sweat poured from Eleanor's skin. Her body arched violently in the bed, teeth clenched, arms flailing. Junie screamed. Wes grabbed a towel and braced her limbs. Her back bowed so hard he feared she'd snap a rib. He reached for his satchel and pulled out a small blade. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and pricked her arm to drain the swollen red line along her vein. The blood that came was dark, tainted, heat rot from too long in the sun. He tied a strip of linen, moved quickly, wiping her forehead, dousing her skin with cool water. Then, with trembling hands, he pulled out a sharpened horse needle and jabbed it lightly into her shoulder, mimicking an old technique to release pressure from the swelling. Junie clung to his sleeve, tears running down her cheeks. "Please," she whimpered. "Don't let her go." Wes didn't answer. He was already lighting another candle, grinding more herbs, whispering under his breath like the war medics used to do when death circled too close. Morning broke, slow and gold. The room smelled of damp cloth and bitter root. Wes slumped in the chair, chin to his chest, dozing upright. Junie stirred first, then crawled toward the bed. "Mama?" Eleanor's eyes fluttered, then opened just barely. Her lips moved, dry and slow. "Junie?" Junie gasped, clapping both hands over her mouth. "Mama, Mama, you came back." Wes opened his eyes. He looked toward the bed and saw it, the soft rise and fall of her chest, steady this time. He leaned back, exhaled through his nose, and muttered softly, "Welcome back, ma'am." And for the first time in days, he allowed himself to believe she might live. The first thing Eleanor noticed was the smell, dust, dry wood, and something herbal simmering faintly in the air. Then came the ache, dull but steady, running down her back and into her chest like a bruise from the inside out. Her fingers twitched. The world returned slowly, as if swimming through syrup. Her eyes fluttered open to a dim room, lit by a single oil lamp. The wind outside scraped sand against the shutters in long, rhythmic sighs. She blinked, sat up too quickly, and panicked. "Junie?" she gasped, voice raw. A tiny shape stirred beside her. "Mama?" Junie's voice cracked like paper. She was curled against Eleanor's side, one hand resting lightly on her mother's ribs. Eleanor tried to move, but her limbs were stiff, sore. A figure shifted from the doorway. "Don't," she barked, eyes wild. "Don't come closer." Wes stopped, hands open. "I ain't your jailer," he said quietly. "I'm the fool who kept your heart beating." She didn't seem to hear him. Her body trembled with fear, eyes darting toward the dark corners of the room. "Where am I? Who sent you? Was it Nathan's brother? Did he find me?" "No one sent me," Wes replied evenly. "You were dying. Your girl was beating off buzzards with a stick. I brought you here 'cause I couldn't leave you there." She looked down, saw the bruises on her arms, the sweat-damp shift. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths. Junie's small hand tugged at her sleeve. "It's okay, Mama," the girl whispered. "He gave us bread." Eleanor blinked at that. Then her gaze met Wes's. "What did you do to me?" she asked, the accusation brittle. "I kept you alive," he answered, stepping back. "With what little I had. If you'd rather be dead, you're welcome to walk back into the sand. But your girl deserves more." Silence fell like a blanket over them. The wind outside wailed louder. She closed her eyes briefly. "Water?" Wes nodded and stepped out, returning with a tin cup. Eleanor took it with shaking hands, sipped slowly. Junie crawled back into her lap. "You've been here for days," Wes said. "Nearly didn't make it through the first night. Fever hit hard." Eleanor's voice was hoarse. "I remember nothing, just heat, and Junie crying. She didn't leave your side." Eleanor pulled the girl close. "I'm sorry, baby. Mama should have kept us safe." Junie nestled her head under her mother's chin. "I wasn't scared. Mr. Wes was here." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Why?" Wes's jaw tensed. He stared at the floor. "Because I lost someone once. My sister. Couldn't save her. Too much blood, not enough time. I promised myself, if I ever had the chance again." He trailed off. Eleanor's eyes softened. "You were a doctor?" "Army medic, Confederate side. After the war, I came out here to forget it all." She studied him, his broad shoulders, the tired lines on his face. There was no threat in him now, just a man with worn boots and a guarded heart. "My husband," she said quietly, "died last spring, a merchant, Eastern money. His brother came sniffing before the dirt even settled. Claimed Junie was a matter of inheritance, offered to marry me or take her outright. I ran." Wes didn't flinch. "Wasn't my business," he said. "Still ain't. But you should know. People are looking. There's a lawyer in town asking questions." Eleanor clutched Junie tighter. "Then we'll move on." Wes's voice was low. "You could. But your legs ain't ready yet. And that kid, she deserves more than running." Junie stirred again and placed her hand on her mother's chest. "Mama's really back," she whispered. Eleanor's throat tightened. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and silent. She hadn't cried in years, not when she married the wrong man, not when she ran with a baby on her hip, but now, here in the dim light with her daughter safe in her arms and a stranger watching from the shadows, she wept. Wes turned away, gave her the dignity of silence. He stoked the stove, added another log. Behind him, Eleanor's voice, hoarse but steady. "Thank you." He didn't turn around. "I've seen death," he said. "You don't smell like it anymore." Junie yawned against her mother's chest. Eleanor kissed the top of her daughter's head, eyes still glistening. Outside, the wind began to ease. The worst of the storm was passing. It began with a whisper in town, quiet at first, then growing louder, like distant thunder. A well-dressed man had arrived on the midday stagecoach, clean boots and colder eyes, carrying papers that flapped in the wind like vultures circling too close. His name was Mr. Elias Whitley, and he was no stranger to the weight of law. He pinned notices on posts and storefronts. Missing. Eleanor Rusk and minor child, Juniper Rusk. Last seen leaving New York. Suspected unstable. Immediate contact requested on behalf of the Rusk family estate. The townsfolk read and murmured. Some shrugged, some frowned. Others remembered seeing a tall rancher buying thread and flour not long ago, with a quiet woman and a brown-haired child in tow. The news reached Wes 2 days later, carried by a ranch hand who had no reason to lie. Wes read the flyer in silence. His jaw tensed, but he folded it carefully, as if it might dissolve with too much pressure. Back at the ranch, Eleanor sat on the porch brushing Junie's hair. The girl giggled at some nonsense rhyme. When Wes handed Eleanor the flyer, her face drained of color. She stared at it for a long time. Then, without a word, she rose and went inside. Wes followed. In the kitchen, she stood gripping the counter, like it might hold her upright. "I have to leave," she said finally, voice low. "Tonight." "No," Wes said. "You don't understand. If they find me here, if they think you've hidden me, you could lose everything. Your land, your name." Wes stepped closer, firm. "That girl called you Mama, and she called me brave. I ain't letting that go." Eleanor shook her head, breath catching. "Wes, I don't care if they send 10 lawyers, you're safe here, and I aim to keep it that way." That night, Wes sat out by the barn with his rifle across his knees. The desert was quiet, but the quiet could lie. The moon was low, silvering the sand. Junie slept curled at her mother's side. Eleanor didn't sleep. Around midnight, a twig snapped. Too heavy for a rabbit. Wes stood, silent as the dust. A figure moved near the fence, tall, cloaked, slow steps. Wes waited until the boots crossed the gate. The crack of the rifle split the night like a whip. The bullet buried itself in the post, 6 inches from the man's head. "You've got 2 choices," Wes called. "Walk away now, or let me dig you a new bed in my garden." The figure froze, then bolted, stumbling into the darkness. Wes stood there a long while, breath slow, pulse steady. When he turned, Eleanor stood at the doorway, clutching a blanket around her. "He's gone," Wes said. She nodded once. "You didn't even ask who he was." "I don't need to. He wasn't welcome." They sat on the porch steps until dawn, the cold easing as sunlight crept over the hills. Eleanor spoke first, her voice tired but grounded. "I thought I had to keep running, that nowhere would ever be safe again." Wes didn't look at her. "Maybe not, but this ain't nowhere." Junie came padding out barefoot, her hair wild from sleep. "Did the bad man leave?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "He did," Wes said. Eleanor reached for her daughter, held her close. And in that moment, beneath the rising sun, beside the man who'd fired a warning and stood his ground, she understood. This wasn't a refuge. This was home. The days passed with a quiet rhythm. Morning sun rose over the mesas, golden and wide, casting long shadows on Wes Callahan's ranch. The world, once dry and hollow, now echoed with small laughter. Wes had fashioned a saddle pad for Junie out of an old flour sack, tied snugly around a patient pony named Bess. Every morning after feeding the cattle, he'd lift the little girl onto the pony's back and walk beside her. "Keep your knees light," he said, "and let her feel you breathe." Junie laughed. "Like this? Better than most full-grown riders," Wes said with a smile. Inside the cabin, Eleanor stirred stew over the stove, her sleeves rolled, hair pinned back. She'd claimed the kitchen without asking, chopping, boiling, kneading dough like she'd known the place forever. One evening, as they shelled beans on the porch, Eleanor spoke softly. "I was training to be a nurse, back east, before everything fell apart." Wes looked up. "I wanted to open a small pharmacy," she continued. "Sell medicine, teas, maybe treat children for fevers. But then my father arranged my marriage. And dreams, they fold under someone else's name." He nodded slowly. "My sister used to dream like that. She wrote stories, wanted to be a teacher, but the war got in the way." Eleanor tilted her head. "Did she pass?" "She was 14 when the cholera hit. I was too late getting supplies." Eleanor reached across the table, placed her fingers gently over the faded scar on his forearm. "You saved me. Maybe it counts for her, too." Wes said nothing. But something in his shoulders shifted, just slightly. That piece shattered 2 mornings later. A buggy rolled into the yard, its black paint gleaming like an omen. A man stepped out, stiff coat, silver-tipped cane, and a badge pinned to his vest. Prescott Legal Office. Junie clutched Eleanor's leg. Wes stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung over one shoulder. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man adjusted his spectacles. "Eleanor Rusk is harboring a minor, Juniper Rusk, under false guardianship. The estate of the late Horace Rusk has requested the child be remanded into neutral custody for her protection and legal security." Eleanor paled. Junie hid her face in her mother's skirts. "I have papers," the man said, pulling out a bundle. "Court approved." "I've got land," Wes replied calmly, "and enough sense to smell a snake under a silk coat." The man took a step forward. "This is lawful." Eleanor broke down. "You're not taking her. She's my baby." Junie screamed, "Mama!" Wes moved faster than the man could blink, stood directly between them. He didn't raise the rifle. He didn't need to. "You so much as touch them," Wes said quietly, "and I'll bury your papers in the dirt, right next to your pride." The lawyer froze. "I'll take this to court," he hissed. Wes nodded. "You do that. But until then, you leave this land. Now." The man backed away slowly, adjusting his coat, fury in his jaw. He climbed into his buggy and snapped the reins hard. Dust rose behind him like smoke. When it cleared, Eleanor collapsed to her knees, clutching Junie. The girl held tight, whispering, "Mama's here! Mama's here!" Wes watched from the porch, jaw tight. No one said it aloud, but something had shifted again. This place was no longer refuge. It was line in the sand, and Wes Callahan had just drawn it. They left before sunrise, long before the dew could even think of touching the dust. Wes saddled his strongest mare and hitched a small wagon. He packed water, bread, bandages, a Bible, and a rusted tin of bullets he hoped not to use. Eleanor wrapped Junie in a shawl. The girl slept against her chest, unaware that home had become a moving target. They crossed the first ridge just as the sun broke over the flats, gold slicing across the scrubland. Eleanor glanced back at the shrinking dot of the ranch. "We can't keep running forever." "I'm not running," Wes said. "I'm leading. There's a man in Marble Ridge, preacher. I pulled shrapnel out of his lung at Gettysburg. He owes me. And he marries folks quiet." Eleanor turned, eyes sharp. "You think marriage will stop them?" Wes nodded once. "It won't stop wolves, but it'll slow lawyers." They traveled in silence for hours. The sun climbed high, cruel and heavy. Heat shimmered like ghosts along the edges of the road. By noon, Junie sat up in Eleanor's lap, blinking, thirsty. Wes passed back a canteen. "Sip slow, sweetheart." They found shade beneath a crumbling rock wall where vultures circled far off in the sky. Eleanor sat beside Wes, legs tucked under her, watching the horizon. "Why are you risking your life for us?" she asked, voice husky from the wind. Wes didn't look at her. "Because I failed once, and I won't again." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and gently touched his wrist. They moved again before dusk. The sky turned copper, wind rising from the east. "Storm's coming," Wes muttered. Junie pointed. "There's dust, Mama, look." A sandstorm boiled behind them, rolling, snarling, alive. "Hold on!" Wes shouted, snapping the reins. The wagon jolted forward, wheels biting into the grit. Eleanor clutched Junie to her chest, shielding the girl with her own body. Wind screamed like 1,000 voices. "Wes!" she cried, but he couldn't hear her. The storm swallowed everything. Visibility dropped to nothing. Horses panicked. Wes jumped from the saddle and screamed over the wind. "Stay low." But in the chaos, Junie was gone. "Junie!" Eleanor screamed, stumbling into the whirling dust. "Junie!" "Find her," she sobbed. "Please, God." Wes pulled a scarf over his mouth and dropped to his knees, crawling, scanning the ground like a dying man looking for water. Then, a cry. Faint, frightened. He scrambled toward the sound, hands bleeding from thorns, his shirt torn. A low mesquite bush rustled. Junie sat beneath it, shaking, hands over her ears. Wes scooped her up, clutching her tightly to his chest. The wind howled on, ripping at his back. Blood ran from his shoulders where the thorns had torn deep. He carried her back, stumbling toward Eleanor's voice. She ran to meet them, sobbing. I thought. She's safe, Wes rasped. You both are. Eleanor dropped to her knees, arms around them both. Her hands ran over Wes's back, sticky with blood and sweat. I'm sorry, she cried. I never meant to drag you into this. Wes wiped sand from Junie's cheeks. You didn't drag me, he said. I stepped in. The storm began to die as fast as it had risen. The air stilled. The world looked peeled and raw, like bone. Eleanor leaned her forehead against his chest. If we live through this, she whispered, I'll never run again. Wes closed his eyes, his voice rough. Then we'd better live. And in that cracked desert silence, holding one child and one vow, they did. The small adobe church stood like a last prayer against the dying sun, half swallowed by dust and silence. Its wooden cross leaned slightly, weather-beaten, but still holding fast. Wes rode hard into the chapel yard, Eleanor limp in his arms, her face pale, lips cracked. Junie clung to the saddle horn, dust caked on her cheeks, her little hands clutching the hem of her mother's shawl. The preacher stepped out from the side door, startled. Wes Callahan? He called, squinting through the whirling sand. She's fading, Wes shouted. She needs a reason to live. He dismounted in a single motion, lifting Eleanor with both arms. Marry us, he said hoarsely. Now, or she won't make it. The preacher blinked, recognizing the fire in Wes's eyes, the same fire he saw when Wes once dragged his half-dead body off a battlefield and sewed his lungs shut under cannon fire. He stepped aside. Bring her in. Inside, the chapel was dim, lit by the last fingers of dusk, pushing through cracks in the shuttered windows. The air smelled of cedar, candle wax, and old wood. Wes laid Eleanor gently across the altar bench. She stirred faintly, her eyes fluttering open. Where? She whispered. You're home, he murmured. You're with me. The preacher fetched water, helped Junie sit nearby, then stood behind the altar, voice solemn. Wesley Callahan, Eleanor Rusk, do you come before God and this child to bind your lives? A scream of wind battered the walls, loud enough to shake the beams overhead. Junie jumped. It's just a storm, Wes whispered to her. Nothing louder than your mama's heart. The preacher continued, voice stronger now, pushing through the howl. You stand not in finery, but in truth, not in comfort, but in need. Speak now, your vows. Wes knelt beside Eleanor, one hand finding hers. Her fingers twitched in his grasp. I ain't ever promised much, he said, his voice a whisper meant only for her. But I can promise this, I won't leave. I'll be the arms that hold you, and the ground you stand on. Eleanor blinked slowly, lips parting. I never believed in second chances, she rasped. But then you showed up, like Mercy with a shotgun. The preacher smiled faintly. Junie stepped forward, holding a frayed ribbon she'd pulled from Eleanor's satchel. She wrapped it around her parents' joined hands, fingers trembling. This means you're tied now, she said. Wes looked into Eleanor's eyes. We already were, kid. The preacher raised his hand, wind rattling the shutters once more. By the strength of your bond and the witness of this child, I pronounce you husband and wife. Outside, the wind wailed. Inside, the chapel glowed with something deeper than candlelight. That night, they did not return to the trail. Wes kept Eleanor close, her head resting on his chest, his arms steady around her. Junie slept curled beside them, her small hand resting on Eleanor's hip like a tether to life. Eleanor's breath came steady now, strong and sure. Wes leaned in, brushing a lock of hair from her brow. You've got my name now, he whispered, voice husky with wear. "That means you don't go alone." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, Eleanor Rusk, now Eleanor Callahan, was no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. She was claimed, she was home. A month passed. The dust settled, the desert heat softened, and the world grew quiet again, at least on the edge of Wes Callahan's ranch. The courthouse in Tucson finally sent a letter, stiff with legal stamp and wax. The adoption was approved, the marriage recognized. Wes held the paper in his calloused hands a long moment before handing it to Eleanor. She read every word twice, tears blurring the lines. "She's ours now," she whispered. "No," Wes said gently. "She's always been." Junie was learning her letters, slow and stubborn. Every day, Eleanor sat beside her with a slate and a stub of chalk, coaching her through crooked lines. One morning, Wes found 2 shaky words scribbled on the fence post outside the barn: Mama and Wes. He stood there longer than he meant to, hand resting on the letters. Eleanor had begun gathering herbs again, drying them on muslin sheets stretched near the porch. She kept her notebook open on the kitchen table, sketching plans for a small remedy shop built from the old lumber out back. She pointed to the mock sign one morning and smiled. "Rusk and Callahan Remedies," it read. "Cures, tonics, and kindness." "I like the third one best," Wes said, grinning. She kissed his cheek in return. "That one was yours." The days unfolded steady and good. They planted an herb garden together, turned a corner of the barn into a shelf-lined apothecary, and taught Junie to grind leaves with a pestle far too big for her tiny hands. Then one night, when the moon was high and Junie fast asleep, Eleanor sat by lamplight and penned a letter. She folded it carefully, tucked it into a small wooden box engraved with her daughter's initials, and left it beneath Junie's pillow. It read, "My dearest girl, the man who saved me wasn't an angel. He was just a man with hands strong enough to dig graves or grow gardens. He chose the second. He chose us. Love, Mama." The next morning, Wes was out front carving into a wide plank of pine with a chisel he'd sharpened special. Eleanor leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him work. He sanded the last letter smooth, then hung it high across the gate. It read, "The Callahans, 3 hearts, 1 home." Eleanor stepped closer, brushing her fingers across the wood. "It's perfect." Junie ran from the house, hair wild, chalk smudged across her palms. She twirled around the porch, arms stretched wide, singing in a tuneless hum, "Mama ain't sleeping anymore. Mama's got a name again." Eleanor laughed, catching her daughter in her arms. Wes reached out, pulling them both close. No more storms, no more graves, no more running. Just 3 hearts, beating beneath the same sky. If this story stirred your heart, the dust, the danger, and the love that bloomed where no one thought it could, then saddle up for more. Every week on Wild West Love Stories, we bring you tales of devotion born in dust, where honor rides harder than bullets, and love carves its name in even the roughest places. So don't ride off just yet. Hit that hype button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a heartbeat from the frontier. Until next time, may your trails be steady and your heart stay wild.